I don't know about you, but I often have an issue with anyone in authority, especially bouncers, stewards, and security guards at events who often seem to love the power they have over us for that short period of time. And in today's story from a music festival in Essex, we hear how that sense of power from security guards, meant to be keeping people safe, led to the horrific death of a man who was just there for a good time. The Brownstock Music Festival grew quickly from a small gathering in a remote field in Stowe Maries in Essex, not too far from Chelmsford, to when we pick up the story today in the summer of 2013, when it was huge by comparison, one of the most popular small festivals in the UK, with 150 acts performing on 5 stages over 3 days. This year, it was headlined by the Fratellis and Professor Green. And do you know what? I named one of my dogs Dizzy Rascal after watching him headline there one year. It was a great show. One of the people really looking forward to the festival this year was 32-year-old Paul Wickerson. He was living in Australia, but he was from the UK, and he was back in the UK this summer to catch up with his family in Surrey and to spend a lot of time enjoying the festivals and music events that are so popular, if increasingly expensive, in a UK summer. Originally from Leatherhead in Surrey, after gaining his degree in Edinburgh and his master's in London, Paul joined a petroleum company in Bergen, Norway, as a geologist. Then in March 2012, he took a new job, this time in Sydney, Australia. Things were going really well for Paul. He was very happy with his life in Sydney with his partner Sarah, who he'd met in 2011, and this was going to be a great trip catching up with family and friends. Paul arrived at the Brownstock Festival site at about 9:30 a.m. on the 31st of August 2013. This was the bank holiday Monday. The festival, as you can imagine, it was packed when Paul arrived, directly from London, having spent the night partying in a nightclub. He had a sleep and then he was off enjoying the festival with his friends, which, as well as drinking some alcohol, also involved taking some drugs. Now, whether or not either of these things are your thing, it certainly is not uncommon for people at festivals. Paul was in a great mood, enjoying the vibe, and was later heard talking about everything being beautiful and sacred. He then had a sleep, but later he became really paranoid, claiming that the group of friends he was with had been robbed. The friends went back to their tent, which was messy. They just dumped everything in there. But he kept insisting they'd been robbed, despite the others assuring him that they hadn't. The friends managed to get Paul inside the tent, but they were now concerned about the normally relaxed Paul, who was, to quote one of his friends, out of control, and we'd never seen anything like it. He was jumping out of the tent and needed reassurance, holding on to me. I continued to try and calm him. A friend suggested getting security, and then Paul ran away. And despite their best efforts to find him, Paul had melted into the crowd, which was now huge, as it was just past 10 p.m. and the headliner, Professor Green, was just taken to the main stage. But two people who did find Paul at about 10:20 p.m. were the operations director for security at the festival, 33-year-old George Maxwell, and a bouncer, 49-year-old Brian Atkins. Now, it was clear that Paul was under the influence of drugs, and he was clocked by the two men walking around in circles just behind the main stage, dressed in just shorts. Quite what happened next is unclear, but witnesses saw Atkins restraining Paul in handcuffs, which Paul clearly wasn't happy about, as he was strongly resisting. But rather than do what they were paid to do, and they had a responsibility to do, which was taking Paul for medical treatment, they thought they would have some fun with him. They took him away to their Land Rover, and Brian Atkins was heard saying that they were taking him for a 4-mile bush tucker trial, which is a reference to the popular TV program I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Basically, they planned to drop him off a couple of miles from the venue and then see if he was able to make it back. And this wasn't the first time that these two security people or so called security people, had done this, as Maxwell was heard replying to Atkins, "Do you remember when we done that at the other festival?" So a clearly unwell Paul was put in the back of their red Land Rover Discovery. Two other security members arrived and were told to sit either side of him, and they did so. Atkins drove, and Maxwell was the front seat passenger. The four security officers then drove Paul about 2.5 miles to the junction of this road. It's between Cold Norton and Fanbridge, if you know the area, but it's a busy 60-mile-an-hour road, and it's known locally as being dangerous due to the bends in the road, particularly at night. And tragically, it was only about 15 minutes after the security officers had dumped Paul at the side of the road that his dead body was found. He had clearly wandered onto the road and been hit by, it was later estimated, at least 4 cars. And what a terrifying death it must have been for him, disorientated and confused in a strange place. Despite the efforts of the emergency services, Paul's injuries meant he died at the scene. All those hopes and dreams gone, as Paul lost his life in rural Essex at just 32. And let's also spare a thought for those car drivers who will never forget the dreadful sights and sounds of that evening. Shortly afterwards, the director of the Brownstock Festival, who had actually seen Paul being taken away in handcuffs, he confronted Atkins after he saw emergency services attending to what was clearly a serious accident near to the festival's site. He said, "We pulled over and flagged him down to ask what had happened to the guy who got restrained earlier on. I can't be sure of the exact wording, but we drove off site and kicked him out was the gist. He might have suggested it was a couple of miles away. He gestured in a direction, but I didn't read too much into it until it dropped. I said, we better hope that that's not to do with the incident that happened on the road." But of course, it was. Following an investigation by officers from the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Directorate, Atkins and Maxwell were both charged with kidnap and with false imprisonment. Now, you may wonder, as I do, why the other two security people in the car with Paul as he was driven to his death were not in court. And what about the director of the festival, who had witnessed his security guards restraining Paul with handcuffs and not intervened? Should he have been facing charges? But it was just Atkins and Maxwell in the dock, and both men denied the charges at their trial, which took place at Chelmsford Crown Court. The prosecutor told the court that the amount of drugs that Paul Wickerson had taken had meant that he was in significant difficulties and that he'd become separated from his friends. Walking around in circles, it was thought by two witnesses that he was clearly the worse for wear for drugs and he urgently needed some medical attention. As the 2-week trial neared its conclusion, the imprisonment charge was dropped on the direction of the judge. And when the jury returned from their deliberations, they revealed they'd found both men guilty of kidnap. The judge described the case as truly tragic. And speaking to the pair, she said, "Your actions during half an hour between 10:15 and 10:45 p.m. had the result that a much loved and talented young man lost their life." She said that Paul Wickerson had been plainly vulnerable and they'd failed in their most basic of duties to protect revellers. Maxwell was jailed for 3 years and Atkins was jailed for 3 years and 9 months. I wonder if you think that those sentences were the correct ones. Speaking after the trial, Paul's parents spoke about their son. His mum Maureen said, "Paul's charismatic nature, coupled with his very engaging and adventurous personality, made him many close friends around the world, many of whom were among the 200 people who joined family members at his funeral. His real passion in life was the peace and absolute freedom of the mountains, snowboarding, and all that was related to his favourite pastime." Outside court, Detective Chief Inspector Simon Werrett, who led the investigation, said that festival goers should be protected by security staff. Of course they should. He added, "People who attend festivals expect those responsible for the security to provide them with a safe environment to enjoy themselves. They do not expect them to manhandle them, to handcuff them, and then dump them on a dangerous road. Mr. Wickerson's death should not have happened. This verdict will send a clear message to those involved in the security for music festivals that you'll be held to account for your actions. Both men later appealed against their sentences, but these appeals were dismissed. And Paul wasn't the only person to die at this festival in 2013. 33-year-old Jonathan Graham died after taking a legal high, a derivative of the designer drug benzofury. And finally, 2016 was the last year that the Brownstock Festival was held, and although other reasons were given for this, you can't help but wonder if this was really due to the story that we've heard about today. So there we have it. A man at a festival who'd reacted badly to the substances he had taken and who should have been given the medical assistance that he clearly needed. Instead, he was used for sport, let's say how it was, by the two idiotic security staff who now have to spend the rest of their lives living with the fact that it was their actions which led to Paul's horrendous death. They've ruined their own lives, had a huge effect on the poor drivers who collided with Paul that evening, and of course have taken Paul from his friends and his family. And as I seem to ask so often on this channel, for what? If you found this video interesting, please do watch one of my others on this channel. Until next time, I've been Adam Lloyd.